So in the next 5 minutes, I would like to race you through some biology and answer the most important question of why we as humans or as human population have sex. At least some of us might have sex. And I want to start with something familiar. Is an example, a very, very simplified example of a buffer overflow. Imagine a web server, and imagine that web server gets fed an URL which is really very, very, very long, and somehow that web server's buffer gets overwritten, and the remaining piece of the ASCII string, which in a word processor wouldn't do anything, ends up in a piece of RAM and gets executed. And the point I would like to make here is that it is the system of the web server or the intrinsic mechanisms that make this string poisonous. And if you stop thinking bits and bytes and start thinking proteins, I would like to switch to an example of anthrax. And it's not because of its geek value, but just because there has been so much attention, and attention in the form of money being thrown at it in terms of research. And please don't worry about the funny names. It's just the names how they're just given by the researchers. And there are actually 3 anthrax proteins. 2 of them are lethal, and 1 is the door opener. And the door opener is called protective antigen. And in a kind of port attack, it attaches very, very specifically. They are all proteins. It attaches very specifically to a protein of the cell, which is called anthrax toxin receptor. It's a bit ironic because that protein's function is obviously not to let anthrax into the cell, but it has a different function, but the function is not known. And now it's true. Now what happens next is that this protective antigen gets cut by a cell protease. You can imagine or just visualize the protease as a kind of Swiss Army knife. It does a lot of things, and here it does something it not really should do, but it does anyway. It cuts a bit of the protective antigen off, and the stuff that is still stuck to the anthrax toxin receptor actually makes a hole into the cell wall. So these are all mechanisms which are not originally designed by the cell, but they are exploited by the Bacillus anthracis and by the anthrax toxin. So yeah, I'm coming to the sex now. I mean that's a very, very important question. What does this have to do with sex? So we are under evolutionary pressure from a lot of bacteria, viruses, and all other sorts of pathogens, worms and stuff. And this evolutionary pressure, I mean, they hack us all the time. And right now in this room, there are plenty of viruses which attack your mucosa and your body and everything. So this is a very, very high evolutionary pressure on us as a human species, or on the animals as well. And especially viruses have a very high mutation rate, so you need to adapt to them very efficiently. And the major line of defense is our immune system. And here it's the antibody diversity that makes a defense successful or not. Now, how can you make your antibody diversity diverse? That's the answer to your question. Only sex, or more specifically sexual reproduction, can ensure a very thorough mixture of your genes. I mean, there are so many ways to reproduce. Cells, for example, just divide, or bacteria just have cloning. They just divide themselves. You end up with lots of clones. Plants can do offshots, Sprossung in Deutsch. So you can just cut off a piece of a plant, put it into the ground, and on some plants it works, not all. You have a new plant growing. And we can't do this obviously. And mixing is achieved, first through random partner selection. Only for the first children. I mean, I'm not suggesting random partner selection every time. And the other most important step is that you get half your genes from your father and half your genes from your mother. And during this step, all your genetic information gets thoroughly mixed. And all this is hidden under the application layer. And no, I mean, No, I mean, seriously, we do not note this. We just have the urge to have sex. And this is just an example how efficient everything works. And it is really the evolutionary pressure of fighting viruses. And to transfer that strategy to computers, you would have to say that computers should have more sex, or at least mix their code very efficiently. And well, this is all I want to have to say. So all I have to say. So keep on fighting the viruses.
Okay, thank you very much. I have the first question. You're talking about silicon. Is there a carbonized version?
No, but we are carbon-based life forms. No.
Yes. Okay, forget that.
Okay.
The first real question, please. Do we have a mic? Here's the mic.
I can hear you, so I could repeat that question.
Oh, we have mics. We do.
Hello. I have a remark to make. You stated that antibody diversity is made out of that of the mixture of genetic material during sex. That is quite not true at the moment, because antibody diversity is generated through translation and transcription of the RNA for antibodies.
Yes, and
so it is already established. So we don't need any more sex to establish good antibodies.
That's not entirely true.
The true point is that we really need sex to keep evolution going, and that's a good point.
Well, you keep about you talk about the RNA, but where does the RNA come from? It comes from the DNA, and that diversity on your DNA level. Well, you're right. There are lots of mechanisms that mix up the RNA part, but the cards you shuffle are determined by what you get from your father and your mother. And when you look at indigenous populations, North America, Indians, when they encountered smallpox, they were basically wiped out because their population as a whole were not trained on these particular pathogens. And this is a problem. But yes, you're right, there's so many ways in the cell to mix the information, but it's just a lightning talk, so I couldn't go into details, yes.
So basically you're saying we should fork more often. Is that true?
Well,
fork is not sex, of course.
It's not really sex. No, cloning is not having
only
sex,
one
right?
parent process.
One parent process. Yeah.
I mean, we are talking
But
about
anyway,
evolution here, and I
let's
mean,
talk
it's a
evolution,
very
but-
long time frame.
When I look around, I don't see too many of the, the other kind of. So I suggest that you go down to the Hexen room and repeat your talk. Thank you very much.
Okay.